You're listening to the Be Better Off Show by Kelly Partners.
Well, welcome to the Be Better Off Show, where we get amazing Australians to share their lessons on being healthy, wealthy and wise to improve your life and improve your business. And today, I'm very pleased to have two very special people, Denis and Jules. Denis is the head coach, Jules the MD of True Colours People Solutions, a group that we've worked with for a long time to help us with our people at Kelly Partners. Good morning, Denis and Jules.
Good morning, Brad.
Yeah, good morning, Brad.
How are you both this morning?
Excellent. Hoping the weather's going to clear so we can have a great weekend, but at the moment we're flooded in. So
fantastic. I hope you got a good book. That'll solve that problem. I always love to start at the beginning. Can you share with us both, where you grew up, how your family were, how you got into your career, where you studied, and just a sort of précis of how you've developed through your career to then start True Colours?
Well, I might lead off. I was fortunate to go to university in my early 20s. I was also, at the time, playing professional rugby league. So I had a career beginning to map out. I was studying commerce at the University of New South Wales part-time, and I was fortunate enough with my football career, the income from that, to fund my education. And I studied for 6 or 7 years at the University of New South Wales while I was playing football, rugby league. And I also started broadening my education. I studied accounting, economics, commercial law, and then bridged out into New South Wales, opened a faculty in marketing. And I also started studying behavioural psychology, which then led in later life into studying extensively in positive psychology. Positive psychology brought you and I together when you were looking for ways to hire great people. I'd spent about 20 years working with positive psychology on profiling systems. With my sporting career, I also had quite a lot of involvement with sports psychologists as well. Through the St. George Club, we had a psychologist that would help us with overcoming injuries and challenges in the game. I also got to know really well John Warren, the captain of the Australian soccer team, who had a sports psychologist as well that was helping all his people. So my education was a combination of being involved with the sport as well as being involved with my first business. I started when I was at uni full-time, and that was a business around taxation strategies for sports people and also taxation strategies for high net worth people. And I started a business in my mid-20s and ran it for about 25 years all over Australia. We ended up having 10 offices, over 250 people working with us. And one of my biggest challenges in the business was finding great consultants that were qualified in particular areas of financial services, like accounting and tax and superannuation planning and business planning. And I began connecting to profile systems from psychology that could help me. And one of the systems that we help you with is a system that started me building great teams of people. We did that through Pennsylvania State University, and that was the beginning of meeting up with Dr. Seligman, who wrote Learned Optimism, Authentic Happiness, Magnify, and he helped me tremendously with a system that he built for MetLife in North America. They had a 60 to 70% failure rate of people, and Dr. Seligman developed a positive psychology system, the one that you're using and we use extensively. And I did study with him in America, and I went to conferences with him, and we've used it extensively now for the last 25 years. So I've had a broad background. I sold that business about 20 years ago, and I kept the profile system, and we've built a business around it because we now have lots of different clients in lots of different industries, that before they interview anyone, they profile first to make sure they're the right people to interview. So my sports career, still very happy with my golf game, and got involved heavily with cricket. I know you're a cricket fan. I used to be a Richie Benaud fan, loved his captaincy and his leadership, and have been very close to sports and building great teams in sports as well, because the St George team I played with won the 11 straight premierships, still a world record. And the CEO of that group, Frank Facer, was an expert at finding the best players in all positions from all over the world. His perspective was, we just won't hire locally, we'll hire from all over the world. And they hired from South Africa, Europe, all over the place. So I've had always a fascination with how do you find the right people for the right roles in sport as well as business.
Yeah, very, very, very interesting. Hey, Jules, how are you?
I'm good, thank you.
Tell us your story.
Okay, so I worked for a private company in the UK, and they sent me out to Australia because I'd been very successful building up the sales and marketing for an Israel service, export service from UK to Israel. And I spent about 10 years doing that. And then they asked me to come and take over and work in Australia and New Zealand. So I did that. It was going quite well. So they asked me to come out here on contract. And then I stayed for another year and then another year. And then I got permanent residency. And when they asked me to go back and work on another project, I said no. So I stayed here. And that's when I met Denis. And he told me about this amazing system that he had. And I was heavily into a foundation. I joined the Magic Moments Foundation in 1998. And it was a basket brigade. So we help a lot of people doing our basket brigades. And then I also started a Grandy program, which helps the elderly. And then I did a lot of courses with Anthony Robbins. I did all the Mastery University, the leadership. And then I went in and did all my NLP with Dr. Tad and Adriana James. And I had so many shifts that I just thought this should be taught to children. We started a youth program, and the foundation is run by volunteers. And we started off in 2001, and we developed a partnership with the Anthony Robbins Foundation. So we worked with them for about 4 years, and every time Tony raised funds in Australia, we used the funds to send to his program in San Diego. So I think the first one that we did, this is before we had the partnership with Anthony Robbins, was we raised nearly $200,000 in 18 months, and we paid for 70 to go to San Diego. And that was 49 children, 11 teachers. And then we continued because we didn't have the resources to do our own program here at that time. That came in 2009. And unfortunately, because of COVID, we haven't been able to run one for a couple of years, but the next one is planned for July 2023, next year.
And how old are the kids that go to that, Jules?
So it's a pathway, it's a leadership pathway. So it starts off with them coming along and they're 14 to 17. And then we have a graduate program, and it's a bit different, higher skill sets. And then we have youth leadership program, and then a leadership, and then it goes into youth coaches and coaches. So the young people that have been with us for 10, 12 years, and they come back and they volunteer their time. And the vision was to have a youth program run by Youth for Youth, and that's what we have. And everyone that comes.
And what's it called? What's it called, Jules, so people can find it on the web?
Magic Moments Foundation is the foundation. And if they go onto that, it's the Youth Leadership and Business Summit, because we don't just deal with everything that kids deal with. We also teach them business skills, and businesses come out of this.
Yeah,
so,
fantastic.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing. So, we know we've saved, we've stopped hundreds of suicides with the program. So we're really keen to, to get back into it again next year. I just saw the potential of this, and we developed the benchmarks together, and we developed the platform. The platform is so simple. It's available 24/7. We can create a benchmark of best people. And then whenever you're hiring or training, you can just compare those employees or candidates with the best people. And I'd like to say it's not about putting people into a box. It's not about saying this is where you are and this is where you're going to stay. It's about looking at where you are. This is the foundation, and then building on that to be the best person possible.
Yeah, very, very interesting. So for our listeners, it was about 2010 or 11 that we started working with you guys, and maybe 13. And what I had noticed is it was obvious to me who the best people were and what their traits were, but I didn't have a formal way for capturing that. I was good myself at spotting good people and understanding, what a good person was in our context, but I wanted to find a way to scale that ability so that it was, it wasn't me doing every single interview to find these great people. And so I found Denis, and I wonder how I found you, Denis. It's really interesting. I'm trying to think of who referred.
I found you through the KPI group. One of your accounting partners was doing the course.
Yeah.
And I was doing the course. I've been doing self-education in business all my life. And so I met one of your accountants, and he introduced me to you.
Yeah, that's right.
And we helped solve some career path for him and for yourself. And it's grown since then.
That's right. I remember. Yeah. So then we were able to profile our best people across the different roles in the organization. And I guess my first observation on building a team of people is most people don't have a clear structure in mind as to how their teams, they talk about wanting their people to work together and wanting teams to work together. But interestingly, Denis, most people don't have a team sport background, so they don't really have a sense of how a team could or should or would work together. We were lucky that, we've got a lot of background in sport, team sport, so I had a clear view as to how teams should work together, and we were doing well bringing teams together, but it was really a question of how we could scale it. So working with you guys, we then profiled the best people in each role. Really, in our place, it's corporate support, our producers, managers, and directors. And then we've been able to subsequently, as we profile people, compare them to known best performers. Just for our listeners, it's not that we don't think that other people could set a new standard and be a new best performer, but we did have unusually high quality people when we started the business, because I think, like Frank Facer, Denis, I just was never prepared to bring into the business anyone that I didn't think either was world-class or could be world-class. And if you get a core team of world-class people, they do tend to attract other people like themselves, which has been interesting. Can you give us a little bit of background about Seligman? Because Dr. Seligman wrote a book called Positive Psychology. I loved the idea when Denis put me onto it, that instead of this guy spending his whole time, the big concept I guess I took out of it was that his aha moment was, instead of spending his whole time trying to take people that were sort of naturally 2 out of 10 depressed or having significant psychological issues, his interest was, well, how do you take people that are 8 and make them 10? And so I love that concept, because I think I've been profiled numerous times under numerous tools, and my principal character trait is what they call a maximizer. I like to make things as good as they can be. So that just naturally appealed to me. I don't know that it should appeal to everyone, but it did to me. When did you discover Dr. Seligman's work, and what are the pretty big learnings, I guess, that our listeners should know and could entice them to go off and read one of his books?
I was very fortunate that I developed products and services for high net worth people and high income people and sports people. And I got connected to the group in San Francisco that retained Dr. Seligman to coach and train at their workshops and seminars. And that connected the MetLife group. And Dr. Seligman was helping the MetLife group. And MetLife were obviously a huge organisation.
They were built from scratch by, I think, what's his name? Broad, right? I read his book recently, and he sort of told the story of how he built out MetLife. So just for our listeners, it wasn't like it was a company that didn't get built from the ground up. So I think this link with Seligman's interesting, Denis, in terms of how he did.
Yeah, they met on an aeroplane. Seligman said to the CEO, "What world are you in?" and vice versa. And the CEO said, "I wonder if you could help us find resilient people that can power through challenges and problems and overcome all their difficulties. And because we've got a failure rate of 60% of our consultants, we bring them in, we train them for 2 to 3 years, and after 2 to 3 years, 70-80% of them are gone.
Yeah.
And Dr. Seligman said, well, with my team of positive psychologists, we could probably identify, which is the profile that you're using, the top 10 subconscious strengths that a great consultant should have. So the mismatching that was occurring was people that weren't highly productive, people that didn't have high levels of confidence, didn't have high abilities to overcome challenges, didn't have high abilities. So they were hiring people that couldn't set goals and achieve them. They had people that in most cases were pessimistic for reasons, and with MetLife they were doing lots of cold calling. And as you know, in marketing and sales, cold calling is a very tough area.
So Dennis, it's funny when you say that, my brain doesn't think it is, but keep going, which tells you something about the profile, right?
And mine does a little bit, because one of my subconscious strengths is I'm what's called a highly kinesthetic person. And this was one of the huge breakthroughs that Seligman had with MetLife. Kinesthetic people like me, and I'm a 7 out of 10 kinesthetic, which means I'm emotional, sensory, feeling, and I feel rejection. It doesn't mean that I don't keep persisting until I maybe win, but we then started looking for low kinesthetic people that don't feel rejection pain. And that was a huge breakthrough that Seligman integrated into MetLife. He not only came up with all the positives that people should have, things like the productivity, the overcoming challenges, the setting goals and achieving. He also said, well, let's stop sending kinesthetic people out who go through this massive rejection pain, especially if your score's 7, 8, 9 out of 10, and we'll be able to reduce the failure rate. And over 2 years, and I was very fortunate to be at a conference in San Diego when he did the case study on this 2-year process and how they reduced the failure rate from 60, 70% down to 20% on 5,000 people a year. Yeah, and you're talking millions and millions of dollars in savings. But more importantly, out of the 5,000 people, 70 or 80% of them are staying. And MetLife's exponential growth over the next 3 to 5 years was extraordinary, because you had people, as you know, with financial services, there's renewals and there's referrals and there's growth, exponential growth from different areas. Because the retention rate went from about 20 or 30% up to 70, 80, 90%, MetLife got from, I think they were number 50 in America, and they grew over 2-3 years up into the top 10 financial services businesses. And then they came down to Australia. I'd bought the system and I started doing some work with MetLife down here in Australia. And my failure rate with consultants was running 60 to 70% as well. So I stopped hiring consciously, and I had about 60 consultants that had taken me 15 years to train and be successful. I probably trained 400 or 500 consultants in that period. But my first batch of 10 people that I sent, in those days, I just had to send them to the University of Pennsylvania to process the profiles. And in my first batch, I got 2 people. And this was the fascinating thing about the profile system. And in a way, you might notice it yourself, where if you ever check the profiles, I wouldn't have hired the 2 people that the profile recommended, because I noticed that they were low kinesthetics and I thought that was a disadvantage. However, good news, I decided to go ahead and hire the 2 people, and the 2 out of 10 became very successful. And my sales team went from 60 people to over 250 people in 5 years. But more importantly, the productivity and the sales were extraordinary. They were different people. They were the right people with the right subconscious strengths. And same people as the MetLife were hiring.
Yeah, so very interesting. Like for all of our listeners who are, clients of ours that are business owners, I think the lesson here is to firstly know, and I think employers get this wrong very often, to know specifically what is the high value outcome that you're requiring of a person to achieve in their role. And if you can do that, then you can certainly build a diagnostic and use a profile to show whether intrinsically the person that you're considering for that role has any, has a better than even chance of being successful in that role. And now, I've always said to our clients who own businesses that there are far more great employees in the world than there are great leaders, that most people that are running businesses run them very poorly to the great cost of the people that work for them. And the poorest thing that they do, in my view, is they are not focused on the outcomes that the business is trying to achieve for the clients. And so they don't know specifically the team that they need and what the specific things are that those team members need to do to be successful for the client. And so when they hire somebody that they kind of like because they're like themselves, or they've got some traits that they don't have that they would love to have, or whatever. They have no, disciplined thinking around what they're trying to find to help them achieve something in their team. And then after hiring this person using no process, some fuzzy approach, they put them into a role with a very fuzzy defined outcome. And then they come to me and, complain about their people, or sit at the pub complaining about their people. Now there's that great saying, be the change that you want to see in the world. And I'm always putting it back to our owners who are clients and saying, if there's something wrong with your children, it's generally a reflection of you. If there's something wrong with your people, it's the same thing. Tell me specifically what's wrong with them, and then we'll find that that's a dominant character trait of yours. And then let's try and, move to a system where we can be, I guess what you've just spoken about, Dennis, much more dispassionate about and thoughtful about what we're trying to do. So what we've tried to do is we know clearly what each role, what the 80-20 of the role is, what the 80% is. And then we're trying to find people that are going to naturally be able to be in their sweet spot of their strengths, doing that dominant thing most of the time. And I guess what Seligman, sort of touches on, but, I guess what I strongly believe is that then there's this great internal energy that comes from people putting in effort, getting the inherent reward of feeling their own abilities delivering. And then that tends to build a flywheel of competence leading to confidence, and people willing to put more effort in because they're getting the intrinsic reward of the internal knowledge of a job well done. So I guess that's my, sort of reflection on what we've been doing. And to your comment, Dennis, I would say that I would have hired the people that the profile identifies. But the point for me is that if there's, I've got a lot of experience with people and quite odd experience that's helpful. But if you want to scale your own ability, even if you think you can pick great people, then if you want to be able to do that at scale, this is a very intelligent and accurate way of being able to scale your impact as a leader in the business so that you can train other people to hire people well. Now, the part of the profile that I like the most, which I'd love to talk to you about, is ability to finish steps. There's a score out of 10 that identifies people's ability to finish steps. Now, I'd love to chat about this with you because I have this bias that persistence is the king of all character traits. And so I just believe that anyone that has a natural high ability to finish things just has an advantage over people that give up. Can you explain that part of the profile and what it's aiming to show?
Yeah,
I'm getting a free tutorial here, Dennis, on to refresh myself on that score.
Yeah, no, it's a pleasure. By focusing on productivity and people's ability to complete steps, processes, systems on time or before time, you actually begin to connect to an area where people are in flow. And as you know, when people are in flow, doing what they love and doing it over and over again and enjoying it all the time, people are very, very, very happy. And as you know, it improves the whole connection with the customer as well, and with the managers and with the team around them. So the clever thing about the profile is that there's 6 questions, and they're tough questions around productivity. And to be able to answer positively to the questions, you have to be subconsciously highly productive. For example, and I know you encourage people to read a lot and study a lot, they tend to be people that when they have a problem, they enjoy searching for solutions. They like setting goals and achieving them. They stay in so this combination of subconscious strengths, when you put them all together, when they answer the 6 questions, and there's 4 questions for them to choose from, there's an emotional question, there's a verbal question, there's a visual question, and then there's a high productivity question. Now, when you see a profile come through and the score registers 7, 8, 9, or 10, those people have answered productivity as their number one subconscious driver when it came to the 6 problems that we gave them. The reason that the profile is so accurate is the people go into a kind of a detached state when they're answering these questions, and they have to search, they have to get out of their comfort zone and search for the answers. And what you're getting, Brett, when you see that number, and I agree with you, it is a magic number, and I'm using your description that some people can be twice as productive as others.
It's much more profound than that, Dennis. It's 10 times, it's not twice. And it's not just their own personal productivity. It's in fact the multiplier effect that they have on other people.
Yeah.
Because people that can get things done, it gives a sense of momentum and confidence to other people that are around them, which is really interesting. But what is it in terms of coaching, or, what of that is immutable? What of that can be coached? Can I take a person that's a 4 and get you to coach them to an 8? My experience is strongly that you can't, but not that one number is everything. It just depends on the role. But what's the thinking on that? And where does it come from? Does it come from, one of the questions is, did you have a job before 12, or, where does this come from?
Life experience.
Yeah, income before age 12 is a series of questions around Dr. Thomas Stanley, the guy that wrote The Millionaire Next Door, and did a course I did at Atlanta University. You're absolutely right. And the beautiful thing about positive psychology, as Dr. Seligman has pioneered, is people can learn. And as you know, to be a genius, you usually got to do something 10,000 times. But to become habitual, it's 30, 60, 90 times. And yes, Seligman thinks that most people with practice could go from a low productivity person to a high productivity person, but I would counsel it and say, is it the area you'd love to work in? Because the connection to flow has to be satisfied, where people, if you just do repetitive, boring stuff and you don't really enjoy it, then maybe not. They can't be coached. But when
we're profiling somebody, we're not profiling them in a role. So it doesn't really matter whether they like the role or not, right? Like when they're being profiled, where does that inherent, I call it finishing, the ability to finish a job, where does that come from?
Well, you start asking questions around what were the subjects you love studying at school? What are the sports that you love engaging in? Where's the places you like to go on holidays. So what you need to be searching for is, and you've touched on a very interesting point. We look for extroverts or introverts, and extroverts love to go searching and finding solutions. Introverts tend to think that instinct, intuition, and will supply that. I question that whole area, that if you really want people to go down the path that you think they could grow into, or you want them to grow into, they tend to need to be externally referenced. And those are the people that love to explore, research, analyse. I'm externally referenced, so I'm not happy until I have all the information I need to be able to say that we're in a position to make a decision. So it depends on the people and what their other dominant subconscious strengths are as to how trainable they could be.
And what about sort of impulse control, ability to focus, ability to concentrate, this whole sort of deep work movement? Where does the profile deal with that, or how, and or where does it come from? How do you identify it? Because in an economy where, most young kids are looking at their phone 15 times a minute, it does strike me that a lot of people struggle to focus on anything.
It is the programming. Yeah, programming, is just, I as an example, I moved my bin from where I normally put it and put it into another room. I still kept going to where I used to put it.
Yeah.
So it's actually, deprogramming and putting in new programming.
So have you read the book Atomic Habits, and have you got any thoughts on his work?
No, I haven't read it.
No, I haven't read it, but I'll read it.
Have a read of that. I'm just fascinated. Like I, as you know, I just love to read these things. But recently, sort of 27th of December, Denis, and Jules, when I was considering the new year, I'd done all my goals as I do and all of that early December. But I said there were some things that I love to prove that you can change to yourself. And so one of the things I'd noticed was that over the last few years, it had become harder for me to read because I just had more people, more input, more other things coming at me. And so I just set myself a goal to read 20 pages a day, no matter what. And there's, because I am self-observant, I sort of said to myself that I just found it got easier and easier and easier. But that reading is, a little bit like walking through mud, hip height mud. You really have to push yourself to sit down, get people away from you, find a quiet spot, a bit of a room of one's own, and focus. I always read with a pen and underline and highlight so that I can keep myself engaged, but because otherwise you can end up 20 pages down the track not remembering where you were. But I feel like the Atomic Habits book talked about micro habits, and if you put your gym gear at the end of your bed when you wake up, if you put the clothes out the night before that you're going to wear the next day, if you plan your goals ahead of time, if you block out time in your diary, if you set daily, weekly, monthly, quarterly, annual, 30-year goals, it just has that effect, Jules, of going back to the bin, is that you're just deliberately putting things where you want them to put you to where you want to go, because, otherwise my sense is most people are just drifting through days. And then I think that's similar in your work day.
I think reading's become a lost art. I mean, I read 10 to 20 books a month. I love reading. I've been an avid reader since I was, quite young. And, I think that, young people should be doing this instead of on their phones. When we're at camp, one of the things that we noticed was, when we first starting this, the kids would have their phones with them. Now we get their team leaders, if they all put their phones in at the beginning of the day and get them back in the evening, the team gets points. So it's their peer group getting them to do that. And it's amazing. It's amazing the difference it makes and how it makes them feel. They've actually told us that they felt freer without having to look at their phone all the time. Yeah. And I just want to say this because one of the reasons we became shareholders in Kelly Partners is because we could see the people that you were profiling. So we had insider knowledge.
Yeah. Honestly, guys, like I've done some intelligent things over time through the help of many, many, many people, mainly by listening to and observing and looking and searching for what works. But it's interesting that you say that because, when I started the business, I'd worked in businesses where I said that character's not always shiny. I can get a tailor to put somebody in a decent suit. I can teach them to polish their shoes and present themselves well and get a haircut, whatever. But those inherent character traits are often found in unpolished people. But you can polish the surface, of a diamond, but you have to have a diamond to make it make sense. And so today, just for our listeners, our people are more than twice as productive as comparable firms. And we can measure that in numerous ways. They also don't work longer hours than comparable firms. In fact, in the firms that I'd worked in, our people spend at least 20% less time on their jobs to be more than twice as productive. Now, we can measure that. We always have measured that. I often would get at conferences, people say, well, how do you do that? And I've always said, well, there's a great book called Good to Great by Jim Collins. And he says it's not people that are your greatest asset, it's the right people. And then everyone will nod as if that makes sense. And then I say to people, because, I'm a bit bullish, Dennis, I'll say, well, that's great. How do you know if you've got the right people? And they're like, oh, well, they don't. Now, if you can't measure it because you don't bother, then that kind of tells you everything. So for our listeners, I've really enjoyed catching up with Denis and Jules today. I'm sharing with you one of many of our secret weapons. And why I love Good to Great is, he has a framework with 6 steps, but it's first disciplined people, then it's disciplined thinking, and then disciplined action. I always say the common word there is discipline. It's a pretty unusual character trait these days, but the freedom that comes from that discipline is amazing. So I'd encourage people to read that book. I'd encourage you to be in touch and reach out to Jules and Denis and see how they can help you in your business. And I guess that today, obviously want to publicly thank both of you because it's made a difference and it's continuing to make a difference. And I still see that we've only scratched the surface. We're not even, we haven't even got started, Denis, in terms of the ability to further coach and help our people to be, the best that they can be.
In answering what you were talking about, helping people maybe go from a 3 or to an 8 or a 10, the first thing they need to have is an understanding subconsciously of who they are now. And who they are now to us and to you is 8 or 9 or 10 subconscious strengths they need to understand as the foundation for where they could go to. And when you are looking at people, for example, that are checking their phones all the time, they tend to be internally referenced people who are spontaneous and impulsive and just feel that intuitively and instinctively it's absolutely okay to behave that way.
Yeah.
How are we ever going to change that? I don't think, because they're doing the 30, 60, 90 repetition, and in some cases 10,000, that it's absolutely okay to check your phone or check your emails or check your social connections 10, 20, 50 times a day. It's the conditioning that's occurring there is question mark, may not be able to be solved. But then you still have the healthy side of the people looking for careers that they're externally referenced and they love doing the research, they love finding solutions, they love overcoming challenges. So you're in a position where you can still keep searching and finding those people. And I agree with you, if you accelerate their education, they'll be the ones that naturally will be the fast growers and the long-term and very loyal and very productive.
Very, very interesting. So look, there's hours of content that we could dig into. I want to thank you both for your time today. I think it's an area that is very worthy of study. And my final comment would be, I say it, I teach our Grow program to help people grow their businesses where I share a bunch of this sort of thing. And And Dennis, I say to people, and Jules, I say to people, your photocopier, when you read its manual, it says 40 pages a minute or 50 pages a minute, and you can't do anything to make it go faster. You can't kick it, cuddle it, tickle it. It's not going to go faster. Our people have untapped abilities that they're not even aware of, and they can grow exponentially with help. And so for me, it's enormously satisfying to see people go on that growth journey and be a small part of that. And if you can do that for people, they get a lifelong benefit for them and all the people their lives touch. And that's particularly satisfying. So, hey, thanks for your time today. Again, I recommend you guys strongly to our people. And I want to say, as I always do, at the end of these interviews, have a great day.
Thanks, Brett.
Thanks, Brett. Lovely talking to you.
Thanks for listening to the Be Better Off Show. If you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to rate and review on Apple Podcasts.
Have a great day.